closely seen the evolution of the business over the years, including how technology and climate change regulations have impacted the utility business. We have Sanjay Banga, President Transmission and Distribution at Tata Power. It's a leading power utility in India. Sanjay has been the chief of power distribution in New Delhi, and also currently oversees the overall T&D business for Tata Power. We have Mr. Debashish Banerjee, the managing director of CESC, a utility which supplies power in the city of Calcutta. Prior to that, Mr. Banerjee was the CEO of Reliance Energy, which was supplying power to a large part of Mumbai. He's been a keen adopter of digitalization. And we have Mr. Hardeep Rai, the CEO of Think Gas. Hardeep brings in over 25 years of experience as an investment banker at Morgan Stanley. And currently he's focused on the energy sector. He's the CEO of the company Think Gas, which is into city gas distribution, and which is backed by a leading private equity firm, I Squared Capital. So thank you, gentlemen, for being here today. Let me start the discussion with Andy. So Andy, you have seen utilities, very close and seen the evolution over the years. What are the top issues in the minds of utility managers today, and how is digital helping them in resolving some of those issues?
Thank you, Santosh, and thank you for having me on this panel. Appreciate the opportunity. One of the biggest issues with utility executives in the U.S., and then I'll talk specifically about California, is really the infrastructure is fairly old. It's been around for a while, so aging infrastructure poses a huge challenge to operations and to continued safe and reliable operations in particular. And then for us in California, what we're seeing is the impact of climatic conditions. All right, for us, we've seen very dramatic wildfires. Our storm patterns have changed tremendously, and so what that has brought an additional focus and really changed the risk profile of our utility, and it's come home in a very big way for us. PG&E, as some of you may know, was the cause of a pretty catastrophic wildfire in 2018, and as a result of that, the company went into bankruptcy. We've emerged from bankruptcy. We've settled with those claims, but what it has done is put, risk has taken on a very different dimension for us, and the focus on risk and the focus on trying to triangulate where that risk exists in our system and how do we go about mitigating that risk is very much so on our minds. And it was with PG&E. It's now down in the two utilities to the south of us, Southern California Edison and SCE, as well as up north, as we've seen these wildfires spread all the way through to Oregon, Washington, and Canada. So you've got utilities up and down the West Coast now very concerned about wildfire risk. But from a concern, what are we doing about it, right? What we're trying to do about it is trying to use analytics, information about weather patterns, information about wind speeds. In fact, what PG&E now has in our territory, we've got about weather stations, creating in essence the largest terrestrial weather network on the planet. And the intent is to get that information, process it very quickly to decide where do we triangulate. And we've taken a dramatic step, I think, very unprecedented for an electric utility, which is in 2019, we fundamentally took what we called a public safety power shutoff. Deliberately and intentionally turned off the power to customers. It's very antithetical to what an electric utility does in terms of providing safe and reliable power. Here we had to turn off the power because the conditions got so severe. Now we certainly don't want to do that, very often, but it is one of the tools to mitigate this danger of wildfire risk. So I would start with, risk is predominantly on the minds, at least, of the West Coast utilities. Across the nation, I think aging infrastructure and how do we deal with that issue of aging infrastructure is very much so on the utility executives.
So, Andy, I mean, just to summarize what you said, you talked about aging infrastructure. You talked about the climatic conditions, which and the wildfires, which caused a problem, and therefore the focus shifting towards risk, and risk management. You also talked about, and that's where I lost the audio a bit. But you also talked about, having weather monitoring stations at different places and analyzing data, sort of that, right?
Yeah, so I apologize. I didn't know where I dropped off, but no, the what I think where I left off was we have in effect the largest terrestrial network that monitors the data, the weather data, which what we do with that is we use that especially during wildfire season to decide where and when to turn off the power. Something that very antithetical to an electric utility, which is focused on safe and reliable power and continuous power. So that's called what we call public safety power shutoff events. And in 2019, we had the largest public safety power shutoff event in pretty much in U.S. history, which was we turned off the power in San Francisco to something like 1 million customers. Now, that impact is tremendous. So we've been working to try and mitigate that with a variety of different strategies. But that tool called PSPS, which is still in the tool set really to mitigate that risk that we're seeing on the system. But it's driven by this confluence of factors of climate change, aging infrastructure, but also how responsive, because the safety dimension has changed dramatically. And our goal is through analytics try and triangulate where we do the work to try and prevent, to try and slowly take the danger out of the system. For example, to give you a sense, in Northern California, in what's considered the high fire threat districts, we have 25,000 miles of distribution circuits. And these are overhead distribution circuits with bare conductor wire going to some fairly remote locations. It's part of the obligation to serve that our utilities have that have caused us to build out those lines. But those very same lines are now posing a tremendous amount of risk. And so our goal is to say, how do we best mitigate that with either underground buries or maybe more microgrids. But fundamentally, till we get caught up and we've started to take that risk out, it's a question of do we do vegetation work to clear trees so trees don't fall into lines? But it's all about risk for us. And it's not just PG&E in Northern California, but you can see the wildfire risk, how it's predominantly down in Southern California, as well as moving up into the states of Oregon, Washington, and then British Columbia, Canada. They've all had pretty traumatic wildfire seasons in 2020. So that risk is mitigating. And when I say wildfire risk, it's the vegetation is getting drier, but it's really electrical equipment is the leading cause of the spark, unfortunately, because I think when those systems were built out, no one envisioned that an overhead conductor line would cause a catastrophic wildfire. There was expectations that it could fall to the ground and cause a fire, but with wet vegetation, the fire really goes nowhere. So that climatic change has really changed the dynamics for utilities on the West Coast.
So, Andy, have these incidences of the risk factors that you mentioned, have they become more severe and more frequent in recent years compared to, let's say, 30, 40 years back?
Oh, compared to 30, 40 years back, absolutely. I think it's we've seen a dramatic change accelerating in the last 10 years. We saw a spate of fires in the 20, I would say 2012, 2013 in California, and then it got worse in 2016. And now it's gotten extremely worse. When you look at the trajectory, when you look at it in terms of two metrics you could look at is number of acres burned by wildfire during wildfire season. That acreage is on a steady climb. Now it does have, like, 2019 was a bit odd. We had a wet year, so that acreage wasn't as high. But you also have a number of buildings or structures that were burnt out. But at the end of the day, I think just the number of fires that have started it gives you a very good count of that. And I think there's enough TV footage to show what a catastrophic wildfire looks like in our territory.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, okay. And what are your plans to sort of address that, and how would you?
Yeah,
How is
I talked about one mitigating strategy, which is the public safety power shutoff. But on the system itself, there's a whole program that we call system hardening, which is either you find a way to remove the line, you put in a microgrid, or the customer goes completely remote, or you underground, or you leave it overhead, but you rebuild it with covered conductor, which is effectively just think of it as insulation on the conductor. But also, in light of that, there's technologies that were in use in Australia, which has seen catastrophic wildfires as well, that we're looking to adopt and test out. There's a technology called rapid earth fault count limiters, which is effectively devices you could put to ground the energy should a piece of vegetation fall into the lines or blow into the lines. So there's a host of technologies that allow us to also monitor this and take action. But at its core, it's about mitigation right now. That's what we're doing. We did a massive program in 2019 to do a comprehensive inspection. And to give you a scale, it was 700,000 distribution structures and close to 50,000 transmission structures. These are the transmission steel towers. But in inspecting them from a wildfire viewpoint, which is looking for equipment that's worn, equipment that could get this thing. And we did it with drones, helicopters, climbing, every angle to take every view on it. And now we're trying to mine that data to figure out what's the degradation patterns of the equipment. So that's some of the things that we're trying to do. And honestly, that journey won't stop for a while.
Sure, great. Thank you for sharing that experience. So Sanjay, let me just come to you. And of course, now we've seen the risk factors like Andy described. And even in India, we are very familiar to some of the weather events. So whether it's cyclones, and especially last 1 year, we had a cyclone in Calcutta. We had a cyclone near Mumbai. I think Mumbai just escaped. But the frequency of cyclones and weather events, seem to be, affecting utilities. So how are utilities planning to deal with that? And in general, digital. If you could just throw some light on how is technology changing digital, operation of utilities.
Thanks, Santosh. First, thanks for having me here. Well, in Tata Power, if you see, there is a 3D which drives Tata Power, and you must be keep hearing about these 3D. One is the decarbonization. We have decided that we will not go for any more thermal assets. Will not build and will not acquire any thermal assets. Second, we talk of decentralization. We open a company, and now the Tata Power Renewable, which is setting up microgrid company, setting up microgrids in Bihar and interior of UP, where we want the decentralized power, is much more, I would say, favorable there, considering the long lines technical losses. And third one is the point which you touch, is a digitalization, because we strongly believe and we heavily leverage all technologies, not only to improve reliability, but also to make sure that we provide unique customer experience. We had advantage that utilities we acquired in Delhi and now in Odisha, even in Ajmer, we had no legacy systems. So once you don't have legacy system, you have good opportunity to install state of art systems, and that's what we did when we installed a new SCADA system for reliability improvements, or the billing system. We bought this system, but we actually started leveraging them when we integrated all these systems. So now the entire meter data analysis is used for checking theft, and that is how we reduce losses from 53% to around 8% in Delhi. In Ajmer, we reduced from 22% to 8%. So one is the first level, which is the foundation technology for operation and reliability, and for the billing systems. The second level, where we went ahead and started integrating these technologies and started using data analytics, and that is mainly for optimizing cost, deferring our capex, and how we can optimize our capex. Extremely, I would say, using smart metering data to reduce technical losses when we use the smart metering data and distribution transformer level. So using technologies, and these technologies, I would say, are not only for improving reliability and providing customer experience. These technologies actually change the entire culture of utilities, and the kind of process optimization you do in these by deploying these technologies is very humongous, and we extremely leveraging these technologies for to best of our use. And the other part which you talk about, the storm part, we don't have this problem in Delhi. We in Mumbai, the entire network is underground, so you don't have that problem. Odisha now, as we have taken over, we are really concerned about that. Uh, what we are planning to do to have some more inventory and have a kind of a bench strength developed in such a way that when we have a storm, we can quickly address those storm, or the situation which we are not expecting to be next year. So basically the better inventory management system, having the bench strength and the support from Delhi and Mumbai will help them to overcome this stormy situation.
Sure. Thank you very much, Sanjay. I'll come back to you later on these points. But Mr. Banerjee, CSE in Calcutta, I've been there, seen the initiatives that you've taken, and I think some fantastic work has been done there. Including use of course, a lot of the network is underground, just like in Mumbai, but also the way you have used technology to help you all in improving efficiency is also very noteworthy. Can you share some of the experiences that on how you have used technology, in what areas you have used technology, and how you have gone about it?
Okay. You see, obviously today technology is the one of the strong levers or tools, to go forward. It's used for actually increasing the operational efficiency and thereby optimizing cost and improving customer experience. It comes in a linked way. So while utilities had the SCADA systems, the outage management systems, the CRM systems, and the other tools, we thought that we should build on it, and so that instead of having a total landscape for digital transformation, we will build it bit by bit, and slowly when we reach a scale, then we'll stitch all of them together so that we get an integrated digital transformation. So if I start from the, let's say, from the network point of view, to improve the network reliability, because that's one of the main key points of us to ensure the 24/7 power supply. Use of IoT sensor-based technology not only from smart meters, like we have used smart meters for two purposes. One is for the high-end purpose, where the high-end residential people are living, where we have done just data analytics not only on their consumption, but also on their tariff mismatch issues. Wherever they, let's say, a residential consumer is found to use commercial category of tariff, actually should use commercial, is using residential. So we do a namesake data analytics. We have used it in a loss-making area where the entire system was having a big loss. Obviously, we use technology like using coaxial cables to, see that theft is, reduced drastically. So that is a technology, and at the same time, we use smart meters there. So we are having the entire data analytics to find out at which point of the time or which point of the day and which consumer or cluster is having loss, so we can do our vigilance activity based on that. That's one. But I feel that the use of smart meters would be more enhanced when if we have a time of use tariff, because with a time of use tariff, we have an incentive of the residential consumers to shift their profile to the non-peak periods. Because when we design our network, we do it for the maximum demand, and which is experienced for a few hours. But the average base demand is much lower. So if you flatten the peak by shifting the load, because generally urban utilities would have 50% residential consumers and 50% commercial and industrial consumers. That's what I've seen in Mumbai, and that's what I see. So if that residential consumers, which is obviously a large category, shift their thing, it would not only help them to optimize their cost, but also it will help the utility flatten the peak and optimize the return on investment on the capex. So while going forward, we found out that these IoT sensors give us predictive health analytics, whether it's a power transformer. So instead of conditioning monitoring, we have a kind of predictive monitoring, and whether it's a distribution transformer or the other network elements. So that data analytics we do, and then we plot it on the trend of the historic data, and we find out if this would fail at which point of time. So we do condition monitoring based on that time instead of having a interval of 1 year or 2 years. Now, if you look at the other part, when we have transmission towers, we use drones because it's very difficult to for people to go up there and understand the condition of the tower. So we use drones for understanding where the hotspots are there for thermal imaging, etc. Now going forward, we thought that we should not only stay here, go ahead. So in terms of using technology, we have used kind of a digital twin for which is embedded with the augmented reality and mixed reality. It creates a walkthrough experience. Suppose somebody has to go through a 130 kV substation or another substation. You can just create a twin here, and you can make the walkthrough experience to there. You can use it. We use it for training. We use it for directing the people on the local side. Going ahead, we also have tried to do it on suppose at some point of time there is a tripping which has happened. So there is a relay which says why the tripping has happened. So we have created a system where when the relay trips, it is available on the mobile phone or the app of the person of the testing department. He can directly access that relay remotely from his mobile, right, through the use of ARMR, and he can understand what are the reasons which are stripped. So he can use his knowledge and tell the guy on the site, you can do this. You can even reset the relay parameters and then use SCADA to restore the power automatically. So this is an advanced stage of usage of the augmented reality or mixed reality. And we find that if we do this, we do a kind of workforce automation where there is a skill centralization. So one person sitting at a place can monitor a lot of things instead of having decentralized guys at individual places. And with the with the number of people with such skill sets going down in the power sector, this would help us tide over the issues. Now, in terms of analytics, we found, obviously when I was in Mumbai and when I'm here, Obviously, the system is underground. Now, in that underground system, we have obviously an N-1 or N-2 redundancy is built in, so that, and it's a ring main unit. So, if one of the equipment or distribution transformer fails or trips, then that is cut off, and that is supplied to an alternate source, to a ring main arrangement. But at a time when I found out, and in such circumstances, when N-2, N-1, N-2 also fails, then what you need to do, actually, you need to dig the concrete road to, take out the cable and rectify it. So people can't wait for so long in cities like Mumbai and Calcutta. So what struck me is that if we can do some predictive analytics, there are two ways of doing, asset health monitoring. One is a sensor based. To use a sensor in a transformer switch is much easier because it is on the surface. But when you have, hundreds of kilometers of cables which go underground, it is very difficult to, put a sensor and put an economic, cost to, take a sensor at which points to understand the health of the entire length. So there we can use historic data, and all the data is available. And I'm talking of HT, because whenever there's a high voltage outage, the larger number of consumers go under outage. So it is better to tackle that issue. So we had taken a data analytics of the last 5 years, and then used the algorithms, AI, ML, etc. And we have our own BI team, business intelligence team, who do it, all the platforms. And we tried to come at a point where we got about 70% success. We are still refining the issue. So this is one. The other part is capex. How can I use analytics again for the last trend to find out the best ROI on where I should do the capex, whether I do capex there, when I redeploy my assets on the underloaded, overloaded sections, or when should I do, and if whatever capex I've done in the past, what are the returns I've got in terms of reliability. So that also is a process of data analytics. Now, these are some of the things which we have done other than customer initiatives, like our meter reader. When he goes, he doesn't use a meter reading book. We have to have that old books. So it is they're using tabs. So in that tab, obviously everything comes, which meter he has to read and all, and whatever he reads, he puts it in the tab, and there is a software to understand whether he's putting a wrong reading or right reading, and that can directly be transferred to the billing system. So this enhances the metering, the meter to cash cycle, and reduces deficiencies. In terms of customer, obviously today everybody has online connections, online new connection, online payments, everything are there. But then obviously we first created a chatbot, which is obviously embedded with AI/ML to go on learning. We have come up with a WhatsApp bot. In that WhatsApp bot, you have everything. Like you can register your supply off complaint. You can register your commercial complaints. You can download your bill, your pay bill, and now we are working towards a voice bot, which is very difficult. It's easy in English, but difficult in vernacular languages like Bengali or Hindi. So in that philosophy we are doing. Other than we are using some customer voice listening tools of wherever it is coming in social media, and to trying to understand the customer sentiment analysis, how we can do something better in terms of mitigating that. In terms of storm resilient, which we have talked, yes, I would like to share with all of you. Though most of our network is underground, there is about some percentage of LT systems, low voltage system, which is overground. And the storm which has hit here, which hit here was one, which a storm which would not have happened in the last 150 years or so. It has a wind speed of 133 kilometers per hour, and the gusty winds continued the rampage for 7 to 8 hours continuously. So there was a huge number of trees which has fallen down and taking down the poles and all that. So we had an analysis. We are going in for better prediction models of weather study in consultation with the IITs or some US universities. But at the same time, we have found out that if you use an aerial bunched cable instead of bare conductor, that is AV cable, and stronger poles, the chances of those going down is less. I had been handling Odisha when I was in Reliance for 3 years, so I had faced filing, and we had seen that huge lengths of overhead conductors which are bare, go down easily because they don't bear the strength, and even interposing those conductors with intermediate poles also gives, reduces the chance of that sagging and falling down. So these things we are doing at places to understand, to see that how do we create a storm resilient network. So that's from me till now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Banerjee. I think really very good, fantastic initiatives. Cutting across the spectrum. And whether it's analytics for the ground cables, fault prediction, or whether it's IoT-based predictive maintenance, or the customer-facing initiatives. Really good to know. I'll come back to you later on how you went about it. I'll come back to you on the organizational dimension. I'll on that. But Hardeep, coming to you, and of course, gas is something which is not so well distributed or well covered rather in India as power is, electricity is. But as you roll out the networks, the CGD networks, how are you thinking of using technology and digital technology particularly?
Okay, well, thanks very much, Santosh. Thanks for inviting me to join. So, as you said earlier, we are a relatively new company. We're still a startup. We're laying city gas distribution networks across 11 districts in India, and in all of those districts where we're operating, gas is a brand new product, and it's a brand new distribution network that we're laying. So, before we arrived, there was essentially zero. So we are starting off from establishing our what we call our city gas station, where we are connecting into the main gas grid that goes across the country, where we're tapping in to essentially take gas. Then we're laying our steel network to be our own core distribution around the districts in which we're operating. And then we're laying plastic pipe, MDP pipelines to deliver to industries, to commercial establishments, and to households, and to CNG stations that we're establishing across the areas in which we operate. So we're starting that completely from scratch. And we're operating in an environment where the city gas distribution sector has been around for a long time in India, in certain places. So, for example, in Delhi and in Mumbai and in Gujarat, it's been around for a very long time. Most of that has been in the hands of PSUs. So PSUs have typically established those networks in the way that they've gone about it. When we have come to this fresh, 15, 20 years later than some of the PSUs have been starting this, we've sort of looked to say, rather than simply copy what has been done before, we've said, look, now is actually a time as a startup where we can do a bit of leapfrogging. Right, I think some of my colleagues earlier, Mr. Sanjay Banga and Mr. Debashish Banerjee, mentioned the fact that if you don't have legacy systems, okay, there's a lot that you can do. And we started off with no legacy at all. We started off with a fresh outlook in terms of what systems we could put in place, and also we were able to think very openly about what we actually wanted to do going forward. And so, from our point of view, we wanted to use technology as a tool, and that tool was really there to help us with asset integrity. It was there to help us plan our operations, our execution better. It was there to make sure that when we start operating, we have better operations, and we can. And for example, we talked about, Mr. Banerjee talked about sort of predictive maintenance. Again, we're thinking about that now, so we can have predictive maintenance across all the infrastructure that we're laying across all of our areas. We will have large numbers of compressors, regulation stations, etc., and being able to monitor them on a predictive basis to make sure that we reduce the numbers of occasions when there are failures. We're putting all that kind of system in place now, even though the assets are going to be coming in the next few years. And so we And so that's those areas. We've also been focused very much on the customer facing element. And so, for example, when we look at connecting households, we have the choice of either going to what is typically used in India, which is kind of the postpaid manually read meter. Sometimes people are now moving towards meters that can be read sort of in mass. Without having to knock on the customer's door, but we decided to go slightly further, and we've gone for prepaid meters. Okay, so that technology exists. We think it's a good technology. We think it's a reliable technology. We think it allows us to be in a position where, frankly, we improve our cash generation cycle. We reduce our bad debt. So we're implementing prepaid meters with all of our household customers. In terms of asset integrity. One of the things that we are doing very actively now is actually building the foundations of our business by laying steel pipelines and laying MDP pipelines to ultimately reach to the customers that we want to serve. Now, obviously, all the pipelines that we lay, they all go underground. Okay, so once you have laid them, they are underground, they are hidden, and unless you do some work up front. Okay, and you actually mark them and you record exactly where they are. Okay, your ability to go and do corrective things later in the event that there is network damage or any other aspects to do with your network is actually very, very challenging. So rather than, for example, in some of the older city gas distribution companies, where their reference to where a pipeline is laid is to say it is 2 meters from the front of the HDFC bank on such and such a road in such and such an area, we've just done GIS mapping across the whole of our network. Okay, so every single joint every single welded joint, every single MDPE joint is GIS located. So, for example, if there is an issue in a particular area, we can simply say, look, it's within this 1 square meter block where the joint is that we need to open up, rather than doing a whole long stretch to open up and to make repairs. We can go to a much smaller area, which over time reduces both our OPEX costs. Going forward, but it just gives us more comfort that we know exactly where our assets are located, and we can just monitor them in a much more efficient way. Even though we have limited assets on the ground now that are operational, we're in the process of putting in SCADA. So we're preparing now for the future as those assets come on board. And when we're implementing SCADA, we're doing it on the cloud. We're making sure that we have proper data analytics coming out of that, and then we're using AI to make sure that we can do all this predictive maintenance, etc. So, in summary, at the very foundational part of our business, rather than say, what do we need to do now to deal with the current assets that we have, we've said, look forward to what we will have in the future and use technology as part of the foundation today to make sure that we can manage that bigger asset that we'll be building over time. And so that's essentially where we've introduced technology. So it's asset integrity, operational management, and customer interaction.
One thing that I think all three folks talked about that I didn't mention. A big part of this also is the adaptation to the future of the grid or the future of energy consumption. Right? I think you hinted at it a little bit with your notion on the battery side, right? And I think as Sanjay was talking about, specifically in remoter areas where the microgrid approach may be more feasible and cost effective with today's technologies. Similar to that, I think we're exploring pretty aggressively battery use in just for acting as a balancer in the grid as we start to go to a more distributed energy world where it's that pro-consumer, the consumer and producer are one and the same to some degree. How do you determine the grid migrating from a one-way flow of power to a two-way flow of power? Also monitoring on your meters, right, the appropriate billing systems appropriately. But then how do you deploy and decide where to deploy battery storage? But not just deploy battery storage in today's version of batteries, but we're seeing battery storage on a declining cost curve driven by primarily the automotive sector and the consumer electronics sector. So the adaptation of that to determine what's the right price point and where on the grid to put it and why we put it on there and how to maintain it. The whole concept of operations is fairly new on the battery side, even for the vehicle manufacturers. I think the recycling of these lithium-ion batteries has not really taken shape. It's still a challenge, and we're careful on our grid. Is when we put it out there, how do we look at the total life cycle cost of managing that new piece of infrastructure? So I think for us, the concept of as we put in any new piece of infrastructure, we're also looking at the perspective of how do we then take it out of service and how do we dispose of it. Is very much on our minds, at least in California, with our environmental regulations, and obviously the need to disposition responsibly. So that's something that I think as new things get built out, how's that consideration factored into? That might be something useful for folks. For us too, very much like I think people have mentioned, the cost side, we've got to continue to figure out ways to get more efficient with the deployment, and certainly we have not fully explored, at least not in my utility, the AR and VR frameworks, but definitely the whole concept of the digital twin to build out the infrastructure in a way that we know exactly what's where across our system. The only thing that I would kind of give people a bit of caution on, what the GIS mapping systems do get us GIS data, but once you do work on the system, you rely heavily on GPS to basically triangulate for you as to where that work got done. Because the GPS systems guide you to where your GIS maps tell you your infrastructure is. And we're finding quite a few instances of the GPS signals do get distorted depending on where you're at. And as a result, it could misguide you in terms of deployment. And that even the triangulation of your GIS is off in some cases. It's not as accurate as we envisioned when we went in and put it in a few years ago. So that's just a little bit of careful thinking around that. So I hope I gave a few points
Sure.
that would help.
No, thanks, Andy. Useful, very useful. And certainly the last point you made about the GIS and GPS having to work together, is important. Is very important. Sanjay, and if I can just come to you, and you did touch upon, opening comments. You did touch upon microgrids that Tata Power is beginning to expand. So in terms of some of these emerging areas like microgrids, batteries, how do you see the future? And even smart meters. I think you mentioned that as well. So, I know that a lot of these things have been being talked about for the last, say, 5 years. But do you think the time has come, or it's still some way off, for some of these things to really scale up?
Santosh, we installed a 10 megawatt battery system in Delhi around 3 years back. And the purpose of installing that grid connected battery system was to take first is the technical competency of these products, whether they can really resonate with the grid or not. And there were many use cases we found. One is the peak load management, one how we can use it for compensating, generating reactive power also. And then we found that the typical Indian DSM mechanism where you pay penalty if you overdraw or underdraw in case of frequency variation. And we found it really has a use case. The point was whether it has reached to a cost point where we can actually install any storage system as such. It has not reached to that. And other thing which we observed, who should install this battery system? It's a distribution utility, or it's someone else who will use this as a virtual power plant. So the ancillary services regulation there has a role to play, which is not clear in India. But yes, at this point, we find that installing big size battery system is not a cost-effective solution, and In India, we already have a generation surplus and long-term power purchase agreements. But what I see clearly emerging is a transition in Tata Power, which we are very often discussing this point, and that's the direction we have taken in Tata Power, is energy as a service. We clearly find that we are shifting more from an energy provider to more of a how we can actually meet the total requirement of big customers. So let me give you an example. Industrial customer, his requirement is not one but many. He wants his power which is to be optimally sourced, whether it's from exchange or medium term or long term time. He wants that he need to have all energy efficient products deployed in his factory or in his premises. He also wants that his electrical equipments, if can be maintained in a much better way. So the composite requirement of energy management system in big industrial places, we are finding demand is coming. ESCO is another area where we clearly find there is a directional shift, and industrial consumers have started looking for it, and they are realizing that if they go for that, there is a benefit exists which was not there. So energy as a service concept, we have started working on that, touching few consumer where we can be a provider of optimal energy solution in a very comprehensive way, not just an energy service provider, but it's a complete solution of optimum energy service provider to him, energy as a service, and creating some platform that how we can serve that. So a conventional distribution utility with a regulated return, I would say that the transition is already started from the income from more non-regulated businesses, and that in fact will, in Indian scenario, will also de-risk the tariff issue which you have. So clearly I see shift in digital technologies more toward the energy as a service, and I find it in our utility, since we have all foundation technologies available and integrated, leveraging it for, as I mentioned, for reliability and customer. I think next phase is deploying digital technologies and platforms for energy as a service part.
I feel that the revenue consumption or the consumption, which we utilities don't look at, will actually go higher, because as the world is getting hotter, and we have seen this October hotter than last October, etc. I feel the use of air conditioning would go up further, and the consumption, despite being a 5-star or an inverter, will still go up, because that's the largest guzzler. It will be followed by electric vehicles, because people would have, like charging the mobile, they would charge their vehicles in their parking lot in their own residences. So that will also flatten the peak for us to some extent. And electric cooking. These game changers will actually help us, understand, get more revenue, get more consumption. So future is more and more electric. So whether it is metro railway or whether it is electric vehicle, electric cooking and others, I think more and more electric is coming, and that's one. And I like to say that what Sanjay was talking about, the storage system. See, today the renewables come to us on an off-grid. It's on-grid, not off-grid. We need to really work on the economy of the storage in terms of the space in our urban infrastructure, in terms of cost, because that ROI is not really coming through. But obviously, with the renewable mix coming in and the shift from net metering to net billing is required. What happens? I'll tell you. Whenever there's a net metering concept, the utility feels that they're losing revenue. But whenever there's a net billing concept, the utility does not lose revenue, and the lower cost of the power which they get from renewable actually is apportioned towards the society. So it benefits not only the consumer, but it benefits also the utility as a whole. So net billing to further distributed energy resources or rooftop solar will be the future thing. So anything beyond 5 kilowatt or 6 kilowatt is in the draft regulation, which will help more penetration of distributed energy resources. That's what my closing comments.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks, Mr. Banji, very much. Hardeep, I know you have a you said, but if you have any closing comments, you can make your comments, and then we could stop the discussion.
No, thanks very much. So, look, I think I really appreciate you asking me to join this. I've learned a lot from listening to Andy, Sanjay, and Debashish. I think they are the scale of utility that we want to become. So, some of the experiences that they have had, and some of the ideas that they are now looking to implement, we can certainly learn from. And obviously, what we're trying to do is get ourselves ready today to have those systems in place for that for that future operating structure. So I think for us, we are very much technologically led to make our business better, and actually ultimately to provide a better outcome or better returns for our shareholders, and also a better outcome and proposition to our customers. Right? That's the purpose of technology. It's not a thing in itself. It's actually something which helps us deliver better returns and better outcomes for investors and customers respectively.
Thank you very much, Hardeep. And I think we've come to the end of our time. I'm sorry we overshot by about 15 minutes. Once again, I just want to thank all of you for this very lively discussion. I think we learned a lot. Andy, thanks very much for joining from California and sharing some of your experiences. The fact about the climate risk having been increased in the last 10 years was very noteworthy. The point was very very stark and noteworthy. Mr. Banerjee, very good to hear about the initiatives that you have taken in Kolkata. Sanjay, very interesting to hear about microgrids. A very interesting initiative by Tata Power. Scale that up. And about the leapfrogging and the prepaid metering. Some of the ideas that you talked about are very interesting. Noted. So thanks once again. I'll make 3 points which I've noted. I'll make a quick brief of that, and I will circulate to all of you, in due course. Thanks once again. Arun, thanks for being there. Sorry we couldn't hear you, but I hope you could enjoy as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Santosh. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.